Hello, everybody. This is Steve Dickinson from Harris Bricken, speaking to you from our studios in Lake Forest Park, Washington, the center of the known universe. I'll be talking today about cybersecurity in China. Theme of my discussion is that cybersecurity in China is really cyber insecurity. Once your data goes to China, Chinese government, meaning the Chinese Communist Party, has access to that data. And the Chinese cyber insecurity system is set up not to protect your data, but rather to ensure that your data and your technology contained in that data is completely available to the Chinese Communist Party and its agents. So let's go and I've included in the materials a very detailed report about the actual situation in China at this time. And so for this talk, I'm really going to hit the highlight points and to make the key point that I want to make, that I have had to work with many cybersecurity professionals. And that point is that the Chinese system, which is designed to leave all data open to Chinese government access, cannot be defeated by normal cybersecurity techniques that we use in the United States and Europe. It requires an entirely new approach to cybersecurity in China and into any of the countries and jurisdictions where China has exported its cyber insecurity system. So let's start with what's the goal in China? The goal in China with respect to the network world is to create a network system where all network communications and data are transparent to the Chinese government, meaning the Communist Party and its agents. And when I use the word agents, I mean the party extends far beyond the government itself into state-owned enterprises and R&D enterprises and the military and virtually every phase of Chinese life and society. And so the transparency that the Communist Party achieves then makes the system transparent to all of the party's agents, both governmental and non-governmental. Now, this transparency extends beyond simply computer networks. The transparency is intended to apply to anything digital networked in China. That means cell phone communications, chat, WeChat, Weibo, even Internet of Things. And all of those networked devices and the information that's available on those devices is intended to be completely transparent to the party and the government. The other phase of that system is that those same networks are intended to be hardened from hacking and other data invasion that comes from Chinese domestic hackers and from foreign hackers and from foreign governments. Now, this is a very, very difficult thing to achieve transparency for the government and the party, but blocking unauthorized invasion is virtually impossible to achieve. And this is the reason why many of the regulations that are coming out of China are so enormously complex, because the authorities in China are working on a goal that I think no one has ever achieved. But clearly, with respect to those two goals, it's fairly well established that the transparency goal is primary and the prevention against hacking and other goals are completely secondary. And this has resulted in a situation in China where the Chinese themselves admit that the Chinese networks are the most hacked networks in the world, and there doesn't seem to be any prospect that that will change over time. Now, to understand the way the cyber insecurity system has been imposed and is being imposed, it's important to understand the role of the party. the role of the party in China has dramatically changed since 2016. And so all of us who have worked in China for many, many, many years are really faced with a new situation. During the period where China was managed by the party under Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and Hu Jintao, the goal of the party was basically to stay out of the way of private business, public business, R&D, and people's livelihoods in order to release the tremendous power of the Chinese people and public and private businesses in transforming China. And that's exactly what happened. China transformed. But since 2016, the party has reverted to a completely different paradigm. And that paradigm is that the party is the leader of everything: government, military, R&D, science, private life, private business. The party is the leader of everything. And this statement that the party is leader of everything has been enshrined in the Communist Party Constitution. Now, in being the leader of everything, the party takes the position that the party must directly control everything. And in implementing this plan for control, the party has learned in the period from 1992 to 2015, the party was quite frightened of the internet. And the party saw the internet and various technologies related to the internet as a threat to their ability to control China. But this totally flipped. And beginning in 2015, the party saw that the internet and networks could be used as a technique of surveillance and control. And the party has enthusiastically adopted internet and network technologies for surveillance and control. And China has created a system that is called, by foreigners who aren't happy with the system, as digital authoritarianism. And so the rollout of cybersecurity and the implementation of cybersecurity is directly related to this concept of digital authoritarianism. And the structure of digital authoritarianism is that the internet and all these communications on the internet that I described will be surveilled and controlled by the party. And one aspect of that surveillance and control is that the party will obtain all of the information that's available on network devices and on the internet for its own uses. Now, you may, and I once took this position, but I was wrong, you may consider, well, what does that have to do for the position of a foreign business that's operating in China or operating with Chinese companies? Foreign businesses aren't subject to being separatists, aren't doing illegal activities that the party is concerned with. Businesses are doing business. They don't support the kinds of social control activities, human rights activities that most people who write about digital authoritarianism express a concern about. But that position is naive and incorrect, because foreign businesses, to the extent that they control any form of technology or other information related to business practices in China, are directly in the crosshairs of the interests of the party. And the reason for that is the party has stated, again, in the Constitution of the Communist Party, that the development of the Chinese economy is the #1 goal of the Communist Party. There is, all other interests are secondary to the development of the Chinese economy. And in that respect, Xi Jinping has stated in his, Xi Jinping wrote a long book about the comprehensive Chinese national security concept. And in that concept, in that book, he states that the primary goal of the Communist Party is to develop China's economy from the current manufacturing base, low-end, low technology, to a high-tech base. And not only that, the plan is to do that in a very short period of time, 5 years. And that's so the number one goal of the Chinese Communist Party is to create a change in the Chinese system to where high tech is the core and other types of manufacturing become secondary. Now, the problem with that is that China doesn't have the domestic core technology expertise that is required to achieve that goal in the time period that the Communist Party has outlined. So the Communist Party has embarked on a program of acquiring technology from non-Chinese sources. In the old days, the party or Chinese entities would acquire that technology through licensing, through contract manufacturing arrangements, through joint venture operations, various ways that cost money for the Chinese government to achieve, and also produced a sort of an incomplete transfer of the information. All the people involved in those kinds of arrangements were protective of their technology. Well, now with the new digital era, the Chinese government has discovered that technology can be obtained directly simply by acquiring the technology from digital resources that are accessed by the networks and other internet operations. We call that hacking. I'm not sure what they call it in China, but that's what's happened in China, is that the transformation since 2016 is that in the cyber realm, the Chinese party and its agents have become the number one hacker of technology information in the world. So as the cybersecurity program is rolled out in China, we're in the very unusual situation where that program is being rolled out, directed, managed, organized by the Communist Party. And the Communist Party is the CEO based on this expanded role where the party leads everything. The Communist Party is the CEO of both the state-owned enterprises and the private enterprises, which are the direct competitors of the foreign companies that own the technology. The Communist Party is the director of the R&D and other scientific operations in China that are being used to assimilate that technology. China is then the commander in the Communist Party is the commander in chief of the military, which is making use of the technology to become a first-ranked international military machine, and a military that foreign enterprises that are for the most part absolutely prohibited from dealing with. And then it's the cybersecurity regime is being rolled out and managed by the party, which through the Ministry of State Security, the Ministry of Public Security, and the People's Liberation Army has become the largest cyber hacker in the world. And quite frankly, we've never faced a situation like that. And businesses and cybersecurity professionals operating outside of China need to face the fact that we're in a completely new situation. And by that, I mean, we're in a situation where if the party wants the data and information, the party will acquire it. And under the current system in China, there is absolutely no place to hide. And what I mean by that is the standard cybersecurity techniques are intended to protect private persons from intrusion by anyone, including the government of the country that they're in. And they're intended to create a place to hide from data invasion. But in the Chinese system that's being created now, that's not possible. And companies and persons who operate in China who think that they can hide are exposing themselves to even more risk than parties who understand what's really going on. So having said that as the preface for what's going on, let's look at how the system is being implemented. Now, one feature about China that's quite interesting for us folks who operate in China is that, as I said, the party has adopted a policy where the party is the leader of everything. Now, that's a policy that goes back to Mao Zedong from a speech he gave in 1962. But Mao Zedong did not believe that the will of the party should be implemented through the government and the bureaucracy. Mao Zedong was very suspicious of the bureaucracy. But the new, I call it the technocratic vision of the party, is that its will, they say that China will be ruled by law, and that's not rule of the law that we think of in the United States or in England. It's ruled by law. It's a technocratic vision where the party will write complicated, detailed rules that apply to everyone's behavior at every phase of life in China, and everyone will comply. And it's like building a clock. The party will decide the clock, and everything will work like clockwork, all an expression of the will of the party. Now, the key thing to note there is that the party is not constrained by those laws and regulations. It's the rest of the country of China that's constrained by those laws and regulations. And one goal is to tame the bureaucracy, to force the bureaucracy to step in line and do exactly what the party wants from the top down to the very bottom. So in furtherance of this goal, starting in 2015, the Chinese government promulgated a whole series of laws that relate to the cybersecurity realm. There was the first law, that sort of the core law, was the National Security Law. Then there was the Cybersecurity Law. There was the Encryption Law. There was the National Information Law. And in process now is a Data Protection Law. And in my report that I provided to you, I have given references to English translations of all those laws. I'll tell you now that reading those laws won't tell you anything. They're written in a very antiseptic, very careful way. They're intended partly for foreign consumption, so that nothing is said in those laws that will raise concerns in the international context. And they don't say much in typical Chinese statutes. The only way that you can understand the application of any statute in China is through the implementing regulations. And there's myriad levels of regulation in China. And this is the cybersecurity area is no exception. There has been a massive amount of regulatory work related to implementing the vision of cybersecurity that's embodied in the statutes. And to my knowledge, none of those documents have been translated into English. And the Chinese aren't going to do it. And my collection of regulations is over 1,000 pages long now, and I don't think anybody else is going to do it anytime soon. But you can't really understand what's going on in the cybersecurity area until you at least have a cursory understanding of what's in these regulations. Now, on the regulatory side, the focus has been on what's called the Multilevel Protection System, MLPS, and we're on MLPS 2.0. And the MLPS system is intended to achieve that goal that I mentioned at the beginning, creating a network in China that is comprehensive, that applies to every network activity, that is open to the Chinese government, but that is closed to bad actors. And that MLPS system rolled out in 2018, and the rollout has been delayed by the pandemic, but the basic, outlines of the rollout are fairly clear. And the reason why they're fairly clear is that the main concern in the MLPS system is for networks systems that have that are connected in a serious way to the entire Chinese system. So the focus at the start has been on cloud computing systems, and there has been less focus on forcing private enterprises to impose the full MLPS system. But the full MLPS system, as envisioned, is a system where all protection against the government is stripped out. So that means that only Chinese approved ISPs are possible. Only Chinese approved cryptography is possible. All cryptographic keys are available to the Chinese government. And when I say the Chinese government here, this means the Ministry of State Security, the local, and the Ministry of Public Security, meaning the police and the spy agencies. All equipment must be provided by a Chinese approved supplier. And when they say equipment, they're not really concerned with computers. They're concerned mostly with server equipment and connection equipment and related types of equipment that are used in cloud computing and in where large companies have their own server operations. In addition to that, all the cyber antivirus programs must be approved by the Chinese government and by the agencies. Now, this is all imposed at the front end through two groups. One is the various ISPs, and that usually means China Telecom or some company like that, a large state-owned entity. The small ISPs have all been driven out of the market in China, and you're pretty much limited to a very small subset of giant state-owned enterprises for your ISP. And then there are a series of Chinese government-owned, they're all state-owned enterprises, consultants who come in and advise companies and cloud providers on what they need to do. Now, as I said, that rollout has been slow at the company level, but the rollout has been very effective and at the cloud provider level. The reason for that is that China has ensured that there actually are very few cloud providers in China, and they have pretty much imposed systems that are in compliance with the MLPS 2.0 systems. Now, the key thing about the MLPS 2.0 is the enforcement mechanism. And this is where companies, as opposed to cloud providers, are directly, again, in the crosshairs. The enforcement system for the MLPS system isn't even mentioned in the MLPS regulations itself. The enforcement system is set out in a separate document that provides that the Ministry of Public Security is given the task of ensuring that all systems in China comply with the cybersecurity law, MLPS law, and all the laws concerning cryptography. All those laws are enforced by the Ministry of Public Security. That means the police enforce the law. And this was a big issue in China because there are many agencies in China that claim to have authority to monitor and enforce the rules of the MLPS and other laws, but the party gave through this regulation all of the authority to the Ministry of Public Security. Now, be clear about that. The Ministry of Public Security runs the domestic hacking operation in China. Their consultants are all young hackers that have been co-opted by the government and now work for the government as hackers. And in this cybersecurity area, that's what they do. They do the hacking. So it's the Ministry of Public Security is the primary organization of the hacking operation, is the agency in China that will enforce the MLPS and other laws. And they do it in this way. The law provides that at any time, for any reason, the Ministry of Public Security can, without a warrant, without any notice, show up at any company office with 2 policemen in tow to have full rights to inspect the entire system that is in place at the company. And in that inspection, the Ministry of Public Security has the right to extract, to take any data that it finds on the system. There's absolutely no restriction. And so, for example, if there's a lot of data on the system, they just take it all. And then they have the opportunity to do a leisurely review of what's on that system in their offices in whatever city that we're located in. Those offices, by the way, are almost always shared with the Ministry of Public Security, who are the international hackers, and that's who gets your data. And in the old days, we used to take, this is particularly important for foreign enterprises, because in the old days, what we used to do, the Chinese bureaucracy has always taken the position that they have the right to come in and inspect computers in private offices. And they've always taken the position that they have the right to set up the server operations and everything in any office in China. And they succeed with private Chinese companies and public Chinese companies. But foreign companies in China, until very recently, had a special status, the wholly foreign-owned entities, WOFIs, or joint ventures. And we always used to tell the bureaucrats, go away. You don't have a right. We're a special kind of entity. You don't have a right to access our system. Those laws that allow you to access everybody else's system don't apply to us. So go away. And most of the time that worked. It was an odd situation to be in because this is the government that's regulating your life, but we told them to go away and they went away. Well, under the new laws in China, there aren't any WOFIs anymore. There aren't any JVs anymore. All there are Chinese companies. The new foreign investment law took that special status for foreign investment companies away. And so the position of the police now is, well, first of all, the position of the bureaucracy now is there's no special treatment for foreign entities. And the situation now is when someone shows up at your door to invade your system, it's not a bureaucrat, it's 2 policemen armed with a group of other officials from the Ministry of Public Security. And in China's system today, it's not possible to tell the police to go away. You just don't do that in China. And so they have access to your system. Now, if they look at your system and they decide that there is a potential continuing problem with your system, what you have on it, then the Ministry of Public Security has the absolute right to install some form of remote access device. And we call that a remote access Trojan. They have the right to install a Trojan on your system so that they don't have to come every month and inspect. They can inspect anytime they want. Now, what actually happens in China is that either after the first or the second inspection, without telling the foreign invested enterprise staff, the consultants, that's a nice word to use, they're hackers, the hackers that work for the Ministry of Public Security, they will take they install a Trojan on the system. And they do it when they connect either a thumb drive or a external hard drive to the system. and they extract the data, and then they leave behind a payload, which is a Trojan. Now, these Trojans, China is the by far the most advanced enterprise in the world that creates remote access Trojans and other forms of malware. And they create Trojans that are very, very difficult to detect and are very, well, they're very difficult to detect. And if you find a Trojan and you complain, then you're just a troublemaker. And the party, the Ministry of Public Security may remove the Trojan, but they'll use a system where, when I say it's hard to detect, what they'll do is they'll install a Trojan that is only activated later. It's not immediately activated. It's down the line. Now, the same thing applies. The situation in China is just like the rest of the world. When I first worked in these issues in China in the early 2000s, we were setting up huge server rooms in the company headquarters itself. Nowadays, most, from what I can see, most of the heavy data and server activity is done through cloud systems in China. And in cloud systems, the government has the same right of access. It has the right to access all your data on any cloud system at any time for no reason. It has the right to install a remote access system for no reason. And even worse for cloud systems, there's no real obligation for the cloud provider to even inform the company that their system has been inspected by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the official reason for inspecting is that the party has to ensure that no data that's prohibited in China is found on your system, no separatist data, no support of Falun Gong on your computer. But the real reason is to acquire commercial and technical data, and that's what they do. Now, the MLPS, as I said, is just starting to roll out, and quite properly, a lot of foreign companies in various ways are resisting the imposition of these systems, at least onto their own computerized and server operations in their own companies. Most people haven't noticed the fact that if they use a cloud system, they are already compromised. But let's say that, well, let's step back. What normally happens when me and other cybersecurity types report this set of problems in China, the malware problem, the insecurity problem, the standard response from an American cybersecurity professional is, well, use the most advanced US, European style cybersecurity techniques to ensure that that malware doesn't impact your system. Now, what we found in China is that this advice simply doesn't work. And in my report, I've given a very extensive set of sort of case histories of various ways that the system that exists now, the system that's during the transition to the full rollout of the everything transparent MLPS system, sort of in this intermediate period, the way that the party and its agents force companies into an insecure environment. And the big example that I give in the in my report is the Chinese tax software scandal that an American company owned by from out of Singapore, TrustWave, did a very excellent, really good and thorough report on the tax software system. Now, what is the tax software problem? Here's the deal. China, now that the party has figured out that making use of the internet and network communications is actually a very effective system of control, the government has gone very aggressively into a totally digital approach to its interactions with companies. So there's very little paper transaction that goes on in China these days in terms of the company interaction with the party and its agents. So the tax software problem was this. If you're in China and you operate a business, you have to report your VAT tax, your collections of income and your payment of VAT taxes on VAT, value-added tax, on a monthly basis. That used to be a terrible process because you had to go into the bank with a bunch of papers and they had to go through all the paper data, and it was a lot of time and was a real burden for all business in China. So what happened is the tax authorities created an automated system. And that automated system was written by a Chinese state-owned enterprise, which is a subsidiary of China's largest manufacturer of missiles. And this company created what they call the golden tax software. And that software was written so that it could not operate on a modern, well-protected computer system. It only works on a Windows 7, unpatched, outdated, unprotected system. And usually what most this tax software is usually given to you by your bank or your accountant. And usually what the bank does or the accountant does is they actually give you a cheap laptop that has the program already installed on it. Well, what TrustWave discovered is that in using that tax software, the software system installed a remote access Trojan onto the laptop, and then it's a Trojan. So that means whoever has access to that Trojan had complete access to the laptop and was able to obtain all the information contained on that laptop. Now, and the information went to an obscure company in China that was affiliated with the Chinese government, and what use was made of that information is not known. The comment from various cybersecurity professionals was, well, the first step is to remove the software, don't use it. But that's not possible. You have to report your VAT every month, and the only way that's possible to report it is using the Golden Shield VAT reporting system. There is no alternative, so you can't remove it. So the next advice was, well, then use the software on a laptop that you hermetically seal and protect from your main system. And that sounds good, except it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work in China is that it's not just tax software that you're forced to use in this insecure environment. All your interactions with your accountant, with your bookkeeper, with the government, with customs are also forced for use with customized software that's written only to work on the insecure Chinese version of Windows 7. So what happens in China is you may at the start very conscientiously, and I did this when I ran a company in China, work to keep that laptop sealed off from your main system. But over time, you can't do that. data has to go back and forth from the laptop to your main system, because it's your whole business operation in China. All that data, your bookkeeping data, your employee data, all the data has to go back and forth. And at some point in that back and forth, the main system will be compromised. And there are various ways that this is done. One is through this kind of software the Golden Shield type software, which is ubiquitous in China. Another way is when you run that software, the bank will say, or the bookkeeper or the government will say, "Oh, sorry, you have to use a Chinese version of your antivirus software." And antivirus software in China is a primary way that malware is injected into systems. In other words, the antivirus software is written to block the bad guys' malware, but it's written to be completely open to the Communist Party malware. And another way is that the internet service provider that sets up your network system will provide you, at least for that laptop, a special router. And that router has malware installed on it. And then when you interact with the government, you will have to use various online forms that the government provides. And those forms are only accessible with an outdated, unpatched version of Windows Explorer 8. And if you use a modern, a very secure internet browser, system doesn't work. So there's many vectors that push you into an insecure environment. And even the most conscientious company will eventually succumb. But even then, once the Ministry of States of Public Security does that inspection that I talked about, they will insist that all the fancy protections that you've installed, VPNs and antivirus software, and there's other kinds of more modern internet securities that are very secure, email communication. They'll insist that you strip all that off. And if you don't strip it off, they'll find a way to target you to make sure it doesn't work. For example, foreign antivirus software requires periodic updates. They'll block the updates. And at one point in China, I used a very secure email system, similar to Proton Mail, an earlier version of similar to Proton Mail. And the Chinese saw that problem too, because now no Chinese agency of any kind will accept any communication through email. They will push you into WeChat, and WeChat is completely insecure. And if you send an email, they don't say, "Oh, we don't take email." They just don't respond. Then you get nothing. WeChat, you get it right away. So they push you into WeChat. And then I don't want to get into it today. They do the same thing with your cell phone conversations, where cell phone is provided through certain cell phone providers in China, where all cell phone traffic is monitored. And for the entire country, that's very difficult to do. Very difficult to do. And but with respect to foreign companies that have technology that the Chinese government wants, they can very easily do a targeted system that listens in to all the relevant cell phone traffic, again, pushing companies that are conscientious and want to protect themselves into an insecure environment. And note that encryption is of no use. The reason why encryption is of no use is that anytime and for any reason, any member of the Ministry of Public Security can insist that you provide the encryption key to any encrypted data you have in China, whether it's on a computer or on your smartphone or any place else. And if you don't provide it, you have committed a crime. And you really don't want to put your staff in China in a position where they're forced to commit a crime. Now, that's the system that exists now, and it's in process. But the goal, as I said, is transparency to the Chinese Communist Party. And is that goal being achieved? Throughout the country, we all know that cyber authority, the cyber authoritarianism in China has actually rolled out very well. Surveillance cameras and open WeChat and open cell phone. With respect to data acquisition from companies, it's not all that clear how well it's rolled out, but we do know that foreign companies are the specific target. So even though it may not have rolled out very well for the entire country, we know that for specific industries that have specific types of technology, that the rollout has been very successful. Now, the final thing I want to point out is the international implications of this system. The first is that I used to think that one solution would be don't open a company in China, just operate in China through contract manufacturing and through licensing. But now I see that is a very naive point of view, because any data you send to China, if you're doing contract manufacturing or licensing or cooperative R&D, is exposed to the Communist Party in exactly the same way as if you had it yourself. And in fact, it's probably less secure than if you had it yourself. So that's not a solution. Now the next problem that comes up then is that China, as everyone knows, is very aggressively pushing out throughout the world with the Belt and Road system. And one component of the Belt and Road system is that a component of it is what they call the Digital Silk Road. And the Digital Silk Road is communications and network and internet systems that are being built out by Chinese companies around the world as part of the Belt and Road system. And when those systems are built, the Chinese government exports not only the system itself, but they export the whole digital authoritarianism package. And part of that digital authoritarianism package is this program of data acquisition from companies. And what you get when a foreign entity is set up a system based on the Chinese model is you get a double layer of surveillance and data acquisition. The local government is being taught by the Chinese party and how to access data in an unrestricted fashion in the same way that the party does it within China. But then what has become a notorious problem, the Chinese then surveil the government, the foreign government. So in those situations, if you're putting data into any country where the network system has been established by the Chinese under the Digital Silk Road program, you get surveillance and data acquisition both from the country that you're dealing with and from the Chinese also. So it's a double problem. Then the third problem we get is that for certain regions that are very important on the technology side, the Ministry of State Security has pre-hacked the businesses in those regions. The most notorious example of that is Taiwan, where, as my report sort of gives you the references for this, but the Ministry of State Security has completely hacked the entire Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing sector. So anything done in that sector, the data is immediately available in the PRC. And in addition, the PRC is hiring literally thousands of engineers from Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturers, and they're going to China and taking all the information with them. So this is something that no one likes to discuss, but anything you send to Taiwan or any other country that's been pre-hacked by China, you're subject to being exposed in the same way as if you were in China itself. And people have asked me questions about this, and Hong Kong is one of those countries or regions that has been pre-hacked. And the question was asked, how has all this been imposed in Hong Kong? And the situation in Hong Kong is the MLPS system itself is not being imposed in Hong Kong yet. But the Hong Kong police, both the domestic Hong Kong police and their companions from the PRC that have been installed in Hong Kong, take the position that all networks and all data in Hong Kong is completely open to inspection by the public security organs. So they've said no, in particular, they've said no encryption is possible and no blocking of any attempt by the public security organs to access data is permitted. Now, in Hong Kong so far, that's almost always been in the situation where some form of protest movement issue is raised, but we're assuming that that's going to move out to the technology sector in Hong Kong. Now, why is that relevant? It's relevant because at least until recently, one technique that US companies have used for sending data to China is to send it through Hong Kong first. And it's sort of clean when it goes to Hong Kong, and then nobody knows what happens when it goes to China. We can no longer take that position that it's clean in Hong Kong. It's going to be subject to the same sort of surveillance and data acquisition that we see in China now. Then the other question that was asked is what requirements are being imposed under the MLPS or elsewhere in terms of the right of a company to make use of its own equipment. And the question was expressed in terms of equipment, but the equipment's only part of the situation when you set up a network system. The software is really where the critical area is. And what we're seeing in China, I've already said this, I'll repeat it again though, is that the government hasn't pushed as hard with the equipment level in private businesses, foreign invested businesses. Where they've really pushed hard is at the cloud provider level. And this is very important to understand if you're a cybersecurity professional. I helped a number of companies in the early 2000s set up foreign-owned cloud operations in China, and after that, I helped several companies set up software as a service operations in China, both directly and then after the rules came in that didn't permit that, indirectly through licensing. And the core of all of that was this. We would go to the cloud provider and we would say, all we want from you is a pipe to the internet. So we want racks that have a connection to the internet, and then you go away. We will install our own switches, we will install our own servers, we will install our own software, we will install our own VPN, we'll install our own antivirus, and we will either on-site or remotely manage the entire system. So the only thing the cloud provider is doing in that model is providing the racks and the connection to the internet. And that worked for a couple of years. As in days when there wasn't really any alternative in China, there wasn't any cloud computing. We were the first ones to do it. But under the new system that's imposed very recently, this isn't old, this is like 2018. All the cloud providers are telling us, nope, that won't work. You have to stay out of our cloud system. We pick the hardware, we pick the software, We may give you some choices on which ones to pick, but we do it all. And in particular, you have no right to access the system and manage it in any way. So it's been a complete reversal of the old method. Now, I think some very, very large and powerful companies are pressuring some of the cloud providers that are connected with US entities to not impose that high level of restriction, but it's getting hard because those companies are really being pushed down, and Alibaba Cloud and other purely Chinese clouds are really taking over the market. And they're very strict about the government won't let you in there. It's not our choice. The government says you can't mess with it because all of that equipment and software has to interact with the rest of the system. You see, the MPLS is designed so that the Chinese government is controlled. It must be in control of the entire system. That means all of the hardware has to be compliant with a single standard, and all the software has to be compliant with a single standard. No innovation is permitted. And what we've discovered is that most of that equipment, the huge routers that they use and the various types of switching equipment are riddled with backdoors and other surveillance devices. And you may say, well, we won't allow that particular device in there now, but every device in China is if it's made in China for China, it has those backdoors installed. And the only way we know about those backdoors is every once in a while that equipment mistakenly gets shipped overseas and people find it. In China, nobody's permitted to find it, and there's no choice because every approved supplier of those devices, part of the approval process is installing the requisite. They don't call it a backdoor though. They call it, interconnection devices so that the government can inspect the system. It's not called a backdoor. It's just a perfectly normal part of the government's operation where surveillance control is absolutely required. Now I rattled on long enough. I'm supposed to look at these about questions. So let's take a look at some questions and see if I can answer any of them. One person asked if you can share the report. And yes, of course you can share the report. Just don't copy it out and remove our attribution. One question that's been asked is about the advisability of using WeChat in China. And you need to think about WeChat. WeChat is now completely under control of the party Ministry of Public Security and Ministry of State Security. Everything that transpires on WeChat is open to investigation and acquisition by the party and in particular by the state security organs. So the question is, do you care that everything you communicate on WeChat is open to government inspection? And that's a tough decision because, for example, you may say, well, I'm only in China, I'm not dealing with any high technology. Nobody's going to try to acquire any technology from me and what I talk about on WeChat. So the concerns that Steve's talked about in this presentation don't apply. And in some ways that's true, but in some ways it's not. Here's what I've seen with my own clients in China. You're in a town, a medium-sized town, and you're doing business with a Chinese company in that town that is a private company, but is very well connected with the local government. And then you start negotiating to dump that company and to move your operations to a different company. And how do you communicate with the company, your new company? You do it on WeChat. And then you get a call 2 days later from your existing supplier saying, what are you doing trying to go around us? Why are you negotiating with this other company? Well, it's because the local Ministry of Public Security is tightly connected with that connected company, and they tell them what they found. So that's the problem in China, is that your confidential business negotiations, even if you don't have technical information that the Chinese government wants, your confidential business communications, who you're dealing with, where you're going, what you're trying to find out, is all open to the Chinese government if it's communicated on WeChat. And for example, I've had clients who suspect that their Chinese company that they're working with, state-owned enterprise, that the chairman is engaged in illegal activity. And they report this, they talk about this to their other staff and to other companies. Well, if it's true, and if that's a problem for the government, then the government will pull you into the investigation. But if it's true and that person is protected by the government, now you're in trouble. Now, and I can tell you other stories. I have clients who are NGOs that aren't popular in China, and they arrange their foreign visits to China through WeChat. And I've had several clients show up at the Beijing airport, and public security meets them at the airport with a full list of their entire itinerary for their entire trip. Sometimes the Ministry of Public Security sends them home. Sometimes the Ministry of Public Security says, go ahead and do the meetings, but we'll be there. We'll be monitoring. And that's all because of the use of WeChat. Now, the problem with saying you don't want to use WeChat is most people in China that you do business with will refuse to use any other method. So you're stuck with WeChat, and you have to consider what that means. It's a very difficult problem. I personally don't use WeChat, and I get criticized in China all the time for not using WeChat. And I just tell people, I'm a lawyer, I can't use WeChat. And they understand it as soon as I say that. As soon as I say that, everybody that's Chinese understands what I mean, and they use some other method of communicating with me. Now, another question that was asked is similar, is a question of, look, we're operating in China, we have technology, we're willing to take the risk that the Chinese government, that someone in China will take our technology. We've done a cost-benefit analysis, and we believe that the money we're gonna the money that we're going to earn from transferring this technology is sufficient to justify the risk that the party will obtain the data. So what's the beef? Why are you talking about this to us? And my response on that is it goes in a couple steps. First step is that, first of all, the companies that say this don't understand the real risk. Companies that say that are operating in the world where what we were concerned with was that one company would infringe on the information. And that company didn't want to share it with anybody else. They wanted it for themselves. And so the risk was, would that one company's acquisition of this technology be a sufficient risk that the foreign entity would be concerned? And that's the way the analysis went. That's the way the analysis went in Taiwan, in Japan, in Korea, in Hong Kong. I mean, infringement of technology is nothing that's unique to China. And it was the analysis that we did in China up until 2016. But now, when it's going to be the party that obtains the data, and that data is going to be spread throughout China in every sector, if it's applicable to every sector, the risk is far greater than people are now calculating. It's a much greater risk. But the second part of the risk analysis is twofold. most people, oh, I'm supposed to tell you guys that this entire presentation is being recorded, so you can review what I've said. And then I'll say, which I wasn't, is also, I go into much greater detail about all these issues in that very long report that you can download. And then I'm also, as I look at these comments, I'm going to do follow-up posts on China Law Blog on issues that were raised by people. And we're of course available if people want to email me directly on specific issues. Sometimes there's confidential issues that you don't want to really spread around, and I'm happy to discuss that with people also. But the other risk factor that people don't consider when they send data to China that is going to be taken by the party itself is twofold. First, a lot of companies in the United States, their primary protection for their intellectual property is their patent portfolio. But the real truth, people who work in this area know, is that the real value of your patent portfolio is the associated know-how. And that know-how is a trade secret. And in the United States and in Europe, much of the value of a technology company lies in its trade secrets rather than in just the raw patent portfolio. And trade secrecy relies on secrecy. Once you expose the secret to the world, the value of your trade secret goes from enormous to zero. So when you go to China and the secret is exposed to the Chinese Communist Party and then spread all over the country, you've lost your secrecy, and then you've lost the value of your entire portfolio. Then the other issue that people haven't thought about at all is that in the high-tech area, we're not talking about normal technology. We're talking about what in the United States is called foundational and emerging technologies. The U.S. is slowly placing severe restrictions on the right of U.S. entities to transfer that protected technology to the Chinese military, to certain companies in China controlled by the state-owned enterprises, and certain private businesses like Huawei. And so currently, when people transfer data to China, they will have a very complex agreement. I write those kind of agreements that require that the recipient of the technology does not share that information with any of the undesirable or illegal parties in China. But that no longer works. And it no longer works. You transfer, say you do a license with a Chinese company that's not on the banned list and isn't on any sort of restricted list. If that company's server and that company's information is transparent to the Communist Party, then your protection, your contract protection with that company is completely meaningless, because it's certain that no court in China will enforce that license. And so you may be totally without intent in violation of very strict US laws preventing you from transferring certain kinds of technical information to people, to anyone in China that's on the prohibited list. And for example, there's just one old example. One old example was many technologies in the United States are dual use technologies. They can be used in the private sector, but they can't be used in the military sector. Well, China has imposed a program of civil military fusion. There is no distinction between the public sector, private sector, and the military. So once it gets into China, it goes straight to the military. Or I should say, once it gets in the hands of the party, it goes straight to the military. And now you're in direct violation of the dual use restrictions, and the penalties there are severe. And it's nothing you intended to do. You did everything that you thought you needed to do to protect yourself. And this new system doesn't allow you to do that. And if you really want to think about it, it gets worse, because if you transfer the technology to one of those countries that's operating the digital authoritarian system under Chinese guidance completely outside of China, it's going to go back to the Chinese also. So you can't escape even that way. So what a lot of people will do is they'll transfer the technology to a country that's not on the prohibited list, but those countries very well may be totally exposed to the party and its data acquisition regime, and you've done it. Now that I've made it clear that that risk is available, everybody knows. So, and of course, I'm not the only one that's made that clear. So let's see if one more question, if I can find another question. So a very reasonable question that's been asked, and it's a complaint that's commonly made against me when I talk about these laws in China, is, and this goes clear back to 1984, is, well, what do we do about it? Don't just tell us about the problem. What do we do to solve the problem? Well, my first point is that there's no place to hide. So many of these people say, what do we do about it? They say, well, where can we hide? And my response is, sorry, folks, there is no place to hide. So you have to assess that risk at the start. Do we have a technology that the Chinese government cares about? If you have a technology that nobody cares about in China other than the private company that you're working with, you're probably okay. But if you have a technology the government wants, then you're not okay. You're directly in the crosshairs. And it's not hard to determine what that technology is. China has the Made in China 2025 program, and China just yesterday has set out a new program on high tech that I haven't had a chance to read yet, that lists all the technologies that are interested in. So you'll know. And then the second point on what to do is that you need to push your cybersecurity advisors to be realistic. The advisors are providing advice that works in the United States, works in Canada, works in Germany, works even in Japan. But it doesn't work in China. It doesn't work in a country where the cybersecurity regime has been created and managed by the cyber hacker. It doesn't work. So you need to face that with your cybersecurity advisors. And I've been thinking a lot about this. What needs to be done is a frank assessment of how cybersecurity can be made in an insecure realm. In other words, the foreign US-based cybersecurity advisors have to advise people, okay, assume that a Trojan is going to be installed on your system in China. I mean, maybe it won't, but let's assume that right now. And assume that if you try to remove that Trojan openly, that you're in violation of Chinese law, and therefore you won't be able to do it. What can you do then as a practical matter to still protect your valuable technology? Now, this is the kind of thing that's done in very adversarial situations. In other words, it's done by spies, and it's done by people who operate in countries like North Korea and Iran. And we have to start doing it with respect to China. And I haven't found anything that works yet. And I've been investigating this very hard, but I haven't found anything that works yet. But that's the approach we have to make. And when I say it doesn't work, I mean, it has to be done in a way where the people who are doing it won't end up in prison in China. And that's tough to do. So that concludes my remarks. And as I said, this will be recording is made available, and my report is available. And I'll be doing follow-up blog posts. And if people have specific questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks a lot.